then start. And this will give you an idea of what we will be discussing in the presentation. Thank you all.
To understand transparency in Scrum, we first have to know what is happiness. Happiness is the ability to control your destiny, the feeling of becoming better at something, and the knowledge of serving something greater than yourself. Luckily, there are some easy, concrete steps that management can take to initiate a complete culture of happiness. One pillar of Scrum that is an introduction to achieving autonomy, mastery, and purpose is transparency. The idea is that there should be no secret associations, hidden plans, nothing behind the curtain. Too often in companies, it is not clear what people are working on or how the daily activities of each employee supports the company's goals. So what can you do? First, all meetings should be open. All records should be publicly available so that nothing happens behind closed doors. Nothing is hidden. In Scrum, there are some rules, but basically everyone can go to all meetings. Any stakeholder can watch the daily stand-up or attend the sprint review. Now, if you are introducing Scrum to your company, the first thing you need to say to your employees, for example, developers, that everyone will know everything. But also, the purpose of transparency will not be to use to hurt them or to punish them. This will only make things better. We use transparency to focus on improving the team. The team can often solve individual problems. They know who does what, who helps, who does not help, who makes team great, who just obstructs. And therefore, everything is visible in Scrum. One of the visual tools you will see in every Scrum team room in the planet is the Scrum board. The Scrum board is just a bunch of sticky notes on a whiteboard. Usually there are 3 columns for tasks: backlog, to do, and done. And when someone starts working on certain tasks, everyone knows who is working on it. Also, everyone knows when the task is finished, and since the board has sticky notes that represent everything that needs to be done in one sprint, everyone knows how the sprint progresses. Everyone can enter the room, look at the board, and find out exactly how the team stands. Every day during every sprint. So when it comes to transparency, what I want you to remember from this video is following. Because the team knows what has been done and what still needs to be done, they can lead themselves. They all know what to do. And you can see if your colleagues is a trouble if the task has been in the in progress column for too long. The team can self-organize to solve problems that become apparent when the whole process is transparent. And they can support each other if they run into trouble. One programmer may have already discovered a solution to a problem another programmer was facing, even if they weren't on the same team. So give your team total transparency. Higher productivity is guaranteed, and your workers will be happy. And Scrum is a set of tools you can use to achieve this. Thank you for watching. If you want.
Okay, team. So that was a brief introduction so that you have an idea of what we're going to discuss today, which is transparency in Scrum. And now I will share my screen with the presentation. And let me just, please. And just so you know, the presentation today is going to be, I would say it's a brief introduction, because everything that forms or everything that transparency is formed by, we could go deeper into, detail. But what we are going to do is we are going to see it, as a, like the basics of transparency. So the first thing, you need to know, and that's something that this fellow Scrum Master mentioned in the video, is that Scrum is based on empiricism, which means that observation and experimentation is what will lead us basically to results. So we will have the ability to observe things, and then if necessary, we will have to adjust, okay, depending on what we observe. And that's what we call empirical process control in Scrum, okay? So this empirical process control relies on three main pillars, okay? The first one will be transparency. Second one will be inspection. And finally, adaptation. So the Scrum framework teaches us that transparency is basically giving visibility to all the significant aspects of a process, okay? So everyone should be able to see everything, ideally, okay? And then in the inspection part, that means that we need to check on the progress and the interactions and other significant aspects of the Scrum process in order to detect patterns that could be desirable or undesirable patterns. And then, depending on what we detect, we adapt, we adjust the process as soon as possible, of course, to minimize any possible risks, to prevent issues in the future. So basically, that's what Scrum does with these iterations that we call sprints, right? So today, we will be focusing only on transparency. And again, it will be I would say, an introduction to transparency. We will not go deep into details of each and every aspect of it. But I invite you to, of course, research more or furthermore into this if you are interested. First of all, team, why should we keep transparency in Scrum? Because the decisions when we are developing a product and when we are in a project, the decisions that need to be made to optimize value of this product and to control risk are made based on how we perceive the state of the artifacts and the level of openness in terms of communication. That is, if we don't know what's happening because the artifacts don't tell you what's happening, or if team is not communicating or stakeholders are not communicating transparently, then we don't know how to proceed further. And that's why we need to, of course, keep transparency in order to, accomplish with the three pillars successfully. So this is, like I said, a one-on-one guide with some tips on how to keep transparency in Scrum. It's not exactly as detailed, but here we have some tips, and then we will see some others. The first one is we should always work closely with stakeholders and customers. And to do that, we have here some tips. For instance, the first one, asking for feedback. Sometimes we take for, I don't know if in English this is the right expression, taking for granted the customers or the stakeholders. But what I'm trying to say is that nowadays it is a fact that stakeholders and customers are more vocal on what they want from us, and they are more vocal on what they need, and they give frequent feedback. But sometimes, and also depending on leadership styles, probably we don't have as much feedback as we would like to, and we don't have to wait for the customers and stakeholders to provide us, or leaders. I'm talking about the Scrum team and the Scrum, the Scrum Master. We don't have to wait for people to give us feedback. We should also ask for feedback, and you can ask for feedback in several, spaces. For instance, I just set two examples here. The review as a Scrum event, it shouldn't only be a place for, the demo, to demo what the team did, but also to ask for feedback. It's a great space for that. And that way the team can see how everything is going. And one-on-ones. One-on-ones is also another way or another space to ask for feedback. Sharing the team status. And this is something that when you share the team status with the customer or with stakeholders, you shouldn't only share a qualitative summary, but also a quantitative one. Okay. And this could be verbal, it could be written, but that's another way to be transparent towards them. And this last example here reassured the customer during the most urgent situations, so to speak. What I'm trying to say is that, for instance, sometimes, that we are in a rush. Sometimes it happens that in the team we have delays and we need to, we have a due date that we have to meet, a deadline. And we are trying to get the user stories across the finish line, and we have, for instance, 8 to 10 more bucks to be done. But upper management sometimes don't know what's happening, and they need to make decisions based on that. So what you can do is just, it could be verbally, or it could be in a written way. You can send them, okay, so the team has these many more bucks to go, or this is the link to the board when everything is, transparent, so that you can see how we are doing, because it's an urgent situation. So that way we can avoid the how the team is doing questions, because we are one step ahead. Okay. So one moment, please, because I don't know if I lost my connection. I don't know if you can hear me, team.
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, great. Because I
Yes, we
got
can hear
this
you.
connection for an instant, it appeared lost. So yes, I was with this tip right here. And then we have the send frequent reports tip, which in case in Arroyo you have, if you're a delivery manager or Scrum Master specifically, not a developer specifically, then you've done this. So basically, the tip here is every week, if possible, or every 2 weeks, you should send reports to your stakeholders or to the customer you're working with. You just have to find the right tool, team. And in this case, we, for instance, for Deloitte specifically, I can set an example. We have used lately a Power BI tool that was being improved, and that was being, some details were added to it, but we basically worked with Power BI to confirm this report and send it. And of course, the most important part of it is include metrics. And that's the, not only did we, have this qualitative part in the report, but also we included all metrics that are relevant to our team and that really reflect the work. Okay. It could be a Kanban team, it could be a Scrum team, but we had the right metrics to show, the progress in the report. So that's something that also improves or, boosts transparency, and be clear and concise when you do so. So these are some tips. Another tip is one-on-ones. One-on-ones are really important for transparency, team. And believe it or not, it might seem obvious. And some people say, okay, yes, one-on-ones, we have them every now and then. From an Agile point of view, in order to foster communication, one-on-ones should be held with leaders. I would say at least once a month, or if you have more time and you can talk to one-on-one with each team member more frequently, even better, because this is a space in which, since it's private, the some things might be discovered, things that are not going to be mentioned in a retrospective, a daily meeting, let alone a review with the stakeholders right there, right? So basically, one-on-ones is a very, very good place for transparency within the team. And we also have transparency in artifacts. So the artifacts in Scrum, I will set a list of examples. We have many artifacts, but basically they are considered information radiators because they show exactly, or they make the work and the goal progress visible. So we can have sprint goals. We could have certain milestones, not necessarily within the sprint. And when you have artifacts that show that, then you are transparent and you're being transparent. So some of these artifacts are, I'm sure you are familiar with almost all of them, but some of them are the product backlog, the sprint backlog. And when they are clearly defined, you're being transparent. Okay. The Scrum tasks board, if this one is up to date, then you're being transparent. And about the product backlog and the sprint backlog, you know that the our product owners, our BSAs, they play the main role in that case. But also as a team, you should feel free to have, there should be this this transparent communication to tell exactly your BSA, okay, so this is not understood and we cannot proceed with this because it's not transparent. It doesn't show everything that should be shown so that we can take it and start the work. So that's one example. And the Scrum Tasks board, I cannot stress this enough, team. We really should be responsible for updating this. I don't know if it has happened to you as developer or as a Scrum Master, that in the team sometimes we struggle to make to have the Scrum Tasks board updated, and it shouldn't be that way. It should be always up to date with all the progress showing right there. We have also these charts: the burn down chart, burn up chart, and velocity chart. If they reflect the work properly, then you're being transparent. But they will not reflect the work properly if your Scrum Task board that is related to these charts is not up to date. And that's why it's so important to keep everything updated. So the burn down chart will tell you, in terms of hours, or it could be user story points, how much work is left in a sprint. The burn up chart is basically the opposite, is how much work has been done so far. And both help you see. In the case of the burnout chart, well, I invite you all to research more about it in case you're not very familiar with how it works, but it's an indicator of how we are doing. Just in this picture, this is just an image, but if this line right here was your ideal line of work, to burn the hours or the story points, you just have to see the closer the work line is to this ideal line, the better we are doing. If the line is over here, then that means that we are like behind schedule. And if it's under this ideal line, then that means that the team took less time than expected. So there's some things to consider there. And also we have the velocity chart, which will reflect exactly how the team has been doing in the latest sprints. If the team has increased their velocity, if the team is stable, if it's a mature team, what is the average velocity, depending on the team's also capacity as well. So these basically are artifacts of transparency that I really invite you to read more about. And we also have the impediments log and the dependencies board. The impediments log is really helpful because it's probably the simplest of these, but you just have to, the impediments or the blockers is the same thing. You just have to take note of the date that the impediment or blocker appeared and the date in which that was removed. And believe it or not, when you see it listed, it helps you with, bottlenecks, because you can see like what are the impediments or blockers that are most frequent inside the team. And also it helps you see the the cycle time in which these impediments or blockers are being resolved. And it helps you see if most of the blockers are internal or external ones. So I highly recommend that impediments log. And it's also a powerful tool when we need to sometimes talk to upper management about the status of the team. And finally, we have the dependencies board. The dependencies board is basically, especially in SAFe, when we work with any scaled agile model or framework, a dependencies board is really helpful because we can establish connections and dependencies between teams, or among different teams, and that is an artifact of transparency, especially when we are sprint planning, and that leads us to the next um, slide, which is about Scrum events. Scrum events are, a moment to also apply transparency. For instance, when we are in the sprint planning, and now you can connect artifacts to events, you see? For instance, in sprint planning, if we don't have a transparent product backlog as an input, we won't have a sprint backlog as an output of that planning that is clearly transparent and defined. If you need a dependencies board, well, that should be used as well in your sprint planning. That's for this first event. Then we have the daily Scrum. The daily Scrum is the perfect place to use your Scrum tasks board because it shows the progress individually, and burn down, burn up chart, depending on which one you are using. I generally, use in Azure DevOps, for instance, we use the burn down, but it depends on the team. And the impediments log. It's another artifact that could be also used in Scrum. And sometimes people take the daily Scrum as a space to just ask, or teams take the daily Scrum, and I've done it too. I think everybody has, to ask, what did you do yesterday? What will you do tomorrow or today? And, any blockers? And yes, that's valid. But at the same time, it shouldn't be only about that. The daily is an integration space. The daily is a place in which everybody should be able to communicate to one another. Okay, we need this, or it's a place to see how we are doing towards the sprint goal as a team, and not only to ask individually, what did you do? What will you do? So that's something to think about as well. Then we have the review. And the review is another Scrum event. And again, as I said, it shouldn't be just to demo something. It should be a space to receive feedback as well. And finally, the retrospective. All the dynamics we make when we make retrospectives are for a reason. And what better space for transparency than the retrospective to for openness and communication, so that everybody has a fun space in which you can express yourself and bring important topics that bring important topics up that need to be discussed. So the retrospective is the perfect place for that. And what artifacts can be used in the retrospective? Well, out of these, you could use the velocity chart, and you can also use a number of other artifacts that represent clearly a quantitative, summary of how the team did during the sprint. So that's how you apply transparency in Scrum events. And now, for the final slide of this presentation, thank you so much for these 20 minutes of your time. This is the final slide. Team, I separated this artifact from the others because, again, it can seem obvious, but the definition of done sometimes is overlooked, or sometimes teams don't have it clearly defined. I mean, the team is clear that they have to do, in the sense that they have to complete this or that, and they should, in terms of quality, accomplish certain things in the team, and they will be done after they do this or that. But sometimes it's even a verbal agreement, and we don't have it anywhere, and we don't have a documentation. And if somebody joins the team, they don't even have a definition of done that is clearly defined and transparent for them to read and follow that and ask questions. So if you work on your definition of done as a team, it could be inside the team or it could be in a scaled framework, again, where all teams have, the same definition of done, because it happens like that as well. So if you work on your definition of done, then you are fostering transparency in your team. Remember that the definition of done is basically a checklist with like a set of criteria that needs to be met, but it's a crucial artifact because it will guide the developers and it will also, be one of the most transparent artifacts that will define the level of quality for a user story or for, depending on the level that that the definition of done is defined in this case, but it could be user story, it could be an epic, or it could be a feature, but it will define the level of quality for those to be released and for those to be considered completely done. So work on your definition of done, check in your teams if you have it completely clear, if it's up to date, because sometimes some processes change and we don't change the definition of done, and you will be good. So I think it was actually 21 minutes. I said this for an hour because, to be honest with you, I didn't know exactly how we were going, to, in case we have questions or in case, something happened. But yes, it was a 20-minute presentation that I hope you enjoyed. And if you have questions, please proceed.